This morning I want to attempt to do something that is always the task of the church, and that is to take the essence of the Christian message, a message that was formulated in the first century, and make that relevant to the 21st century, where we live and move and have our being. This is always the task of the church. On the one hand, remain faithful. On the other hand, to remain relevant. And I think that there is nothing more to the point of our need for relevancy today than to revisit the whole concept of salvation and be able to place that in an intelligent, realistic, believable 20th century formulation. The scripture for today is from Paul's letter to the church at Rome, in which Paul begins to essentialize what he believes the Christian message is all about. It's from the 13th chapter, and it's the 8th and 10th verses of that chapter, where Paul says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another. Love does no wrong to another. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law." Now, in other places, Paul writes similar messages. While he was in prison, he wrote a letter to the church at Ephesus in which he said, "I beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all." And then again, he writes the letter to the church at Galatia, a church where the Gentile world and the Jewish world were coming together in a very conflicted way. The argument at the time was over the issue of circumcision, because to be Jewish was to be circumcised. Only men counted, of course, but to be Jewish was to be circumcised. And the Gentiles who wanted to convert to Christianity were not happy about the idea of having to be circumcised in order to be true Christians. And they were arguing about whether circumcision was necessary or whether it was not necessary. And in that statement, Paul said something profound. He said, the only thing that counts is not circumcision or uncircumcision. The only thing that counts is faith working through love. Now, these scriptures are a profound statement of what I consider to be the essence of Christianity. And I think these scriptures speak to us clearly about love as being all that matters. They speak to us of love as a calling, from the Latin vocatione, a calling, a vocation, which means it is a way of living one's life. They speak of living one's life worthy of the calling to which we are called, meaning living our life the way it was meant to be lived. And I think the church needs to revisit that essential message that all that really matters is love. But what the church understates, I think, is that the prerequisite for love is always authentic living. There is nothing in human experience that allows for inauthentic love. It would be like going into an art museum and saying, well, here is an inauthentic Picasso. It would be worthless. There is nothing in human experience that allows for inauthentic love. And what we know, both biblically, theologically, psychologically, is that inauthenticity is grounded in fear. And fear always stands in opposition to love. It was the gospel, it was the first letter of John, in which John said, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. If anything is clear in the scriptures, it is that fear stands in opposition to love, and love is the essence of living life the way it ought to be lived. And so I wanted to take today and talk a little bit about salvation and how all of that applies to this concept of love and fear. But remember that for me, and I think for the scriptures, the real issue of life comes down to, do we live a love-based life, or do we live a fear-based life? And that the Christian message at its essence is that we are called, vocation, we are called to live our lives in love, and to live our lives in any other way is to live life inauthentically and render life less meaningful than it was ever meant to be. So I want to suggest that the church in the 21st century needs to move past all of the distortions that have obscured the essence of the Christian message, move out from behind the rigid stockade of creeds and rules, move away from the historic tendency to speak of sin and despair and dependency on what one historical figure, Jesus of Nazareth, only can do for our salvation, and move into a reclaiming of the good news of what we ourselves can do with the power of love, with the acknowledgement that the real task of the church is to introduce persons to their own possibilities for living and living well, living full, for living enriched, enlightened, authentic lives. And the real ministry of the church is to help people overcome what stands in the way of living that authentic life that is the necessary prerequisite to love. Now, when I was a kid growing up, there was a lot of talk in the church about how sinful we were. And there was a lot of talk about the original sin that deeply stains us from within. I can still remember the hymn in my church. I was sinking deep in sin, far from this distant shore, very deeply stained within, sinking to rise no more. And that's quite a message to give to a little kid. But that was the message the church was giving. And then the second message was one of absolute dependency. But the master of the sea heard my despairing cry, and from the waters lifted me. Now saved am I. I didn't do a thing. I didn't have to swim to the shore. I didn't have to learn how to swim for myself. The master just lifts me because I'm deeply stained within. I'm sinking to rise no more. Now, obviously, that had an impact on my child's consciousness because I can still quote the hymn and I can still remember singing it, and I can still remember all those grandparents around me singing with loud voices as if they were proclaiming some kind of good news, which incidentally is inherent in that hymn somewhere. But the message that was left to me is that something is wrong with us humans. Something is deeply sinful about us as humans. And salvation comes to us only by what someone else has done for us. And that if we'll just believe that someone else has done that for us, then we will be saved. Salvation. Now that comes out of a history that is long behind us. It comes out of an understanding that defies what we know about our human potentiality, our human possibilities, our capacity for loving, our capacity for living authentic lives with and for one another. It certainly stands in contrast to our ability to pursue self-actualization in the midst of our human experience. And I want to suggest that the church needs to send out a different message. It needs to redefine salvation based on what it really means, what the word really means. The word salvation comes from the word salvus, which is Latin for health. We seek health, and we live unhealthy lives when we live lives in fear. So bear with me as I just walk us through this for a moment. Most people will tell you that they're afraid to be themselves openly, honestly, authentically, because they are afraid of rejection. They are afraid of judgment. They're afraid of sensing their own inadequacy. They're afraid of comparison. They're afraid of being put down. They're afraid of not being loved. And so we have a society in which people feel like, I have to be pleasing to you. I have to be who you want me to be in order for you to be accepting of me, in order for you to be affirming of me, certainly in order for you to be loving to me. And so the real temptation in the wilderness of our lives is the temptation to pretend we're someone we're not, to take the cue as to what we are called to be from what others demand of us, and to work as hard as we can to be pleasing to the other. And yet, the essence of life is to thine own self be true. And when I am not being myself in order to please the other or out of fear of being rejected by the other, then what happens is I begin to lose my integrity. Now, the word integrity is key here, because the word integrity comes from the root word integrate. It is to suggest that my outward words, deeds, and actions need to be integrated with my inner world of authentic thoughts, feelings, and attitudes. It is what John means in his letter when he says, little children, let us love not in word and speech, but in deed and truth. It has to be integrated with our actions. What we're saying in word and speech has to be integrated with our inner world of actions, our inner world of attitude, our inner world of commitment. And when my outward words, deeds, and actions are not integrated with what's truly going on within me, then I and my relationships literally begin to disintegrate. And I'm no longer at ease being myself, which is what the word dis-ease, disease, means. I am no longer at ease being myself. And therefore, because I am now experiencing disease, I stand in the need of salvus, health, salvation. And what brings me to health? Overcoming the dis-ease, the disintegration with at-one-ment with myself. To restore to myself a sense of at-one-ment between my outward words, deeds, actions, and my inner world of feelings, thoughts, and attitudes. Which, of course, is what the word atonement means, at-one-ment. So atonement, which is both the prerequisite for and the result of salvus, health, that overcomes dis-ease because I'm not free to be myself in order to be what others want me to be, which leads to disintegration because I sacrificed my integrity, is what the church needs to be talking about. The church needs to be that community in which people feel free to be themselves openly, honestly, authentically, without fear, without facade, without hesitation. The church needs to be that community in which people feel free to trust that they are accepted and that they are valued and that they are seen for their own preciousness. The church needs to be that community of people that affirms the value of all persons. And that affirms it not just in word and speech, but in deed and action and truth. And so what does the meaning of salvation or understanding of salvation need to be in the 21st century? It means salvation is the healthy life of authentic living in which fear is set aside and love is consistently and trustworthily expressed. Salvation is the commitment to live that life, as Paul says, worthy of the calling to which we have been called, living that life the way life is meant to be, fulfilling the possibilities and actualization of each of our own precious, unique lives, and always enhancing the possibility of self-actualization for the other. It is that community that seeks always and only to be a beneficial presence to oneself and always to the other, encouraging them to free themselves from fear and celebrate themselves in love. So when you go back and hear the scriptures, listen again to what they're saying and listen to it in the terms I've just suggested. Paul to the Galatians, the only thing that matters is faith working through love. Paul to the Romans, Paul to the Ephesians, I beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you were called. Be who you are meant to be, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. And John's powerful conclusion, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not reached perfection in love. So with Paul's scripture to the Romans, let us say together, owe no one anything except to love one another. Love does no wrong to another. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. But first, we cast out fear. First, we stand as a community that affirms life and love. First, we stand with those who encounter us as a beneficial presence. We accept them, we value them, we see them as precious, and we love them. This is what the church is called to be. This is the battle the church is called to fight. But this is what salvation, salvus, health, that sets aside the dis-ease of our lives, the spiritual dis-ease, is really all about. And it's time for the modern church to own that, to express that, and to live that. May it be so.